New York Knicks are at the halfway point of their season. 36-18, 54 games played, 28 to go. In this video, I'll explore the reasons for optimism and concern for the Knicks moving forward from the regular season and into the playoffs. And I'll also have a prediction at the end of this video. What is going on, everyone? This is Luca here from Knicks Cast, coming back at you with another video. Now, it's been a while since I've created consistent content, at least over a month or so. Hoping to get back to that and hopefully building that back into live streams and hoping to maintain content on a consistent basis. But to the subscribers who have stayed with me, liked my content, shared out my content, and have done the stuff that subscribers usually do to support, I appreciate all of that. I just want to say firsthand. And if you guys are new here watching this video, if you guys would continue to hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so you know when I go live or a video or a live stream hits. Regardless, let's get into the video. So, at the halfway point of the season, the New York Knicks are 36-18, third in the Eastern Conference and second in the Atlantic Division. Now, talking about the record, this is the highest Knicks win total they've had heading into an All-Star break since the 72-73 season. If you guys don't know, that is the last time the New York Knicks won a NBA Finals. It's been 50 years plus. Hopefully we end this drought sometime soon because the Knicks are long starved. And us fans, we've been loyal through the thick and thin, and we obviously deserve one. But to get into more of just some of the general rankings that the Knicks have ranked across the NBA, the Knicks are the second best offensive team in the NBA, having an offensive rating of 121.1. They're the 20th best defensive team, and we'll obviously get into the defense as well and the concerns there. A rating of 115 on the defensive side of the ball. Their net rating, however, ranks 5th best in the league with a plus 6.1. The Knicks score the 4th most points per game across the NBA, 118.4 there. They allow the 13th most points, 13th most points per game, 112.5 in that category. They have the third highest field goal percentage across teams across the league, 49.6. 20th in opposing field goal percentage, 47.3. Their three-point percentage is 5th best across the NBA, 37.6, although the attempts aren't as high. Opposing three-point percentage, the Knicks are the worst defending that, 37.8% on a daily basis that the Knicks give up. And the assists per game, which I also find interesting, and which the Knicks have taken a step forward in the offensive aspect with the additions of Karl-Anthony Towns and the overall play of Jalen Brunson and the additions of Mikal Bridges as well. The Knicks rank 10th, 27.6 assists per game, and it's just a fact as well, the Knicks have never ranked top 10 in assists with Tom Thibodeau as head coach. I don't remember the last time they ranked overall top 10 in assists, but obviously you subtract Julius Randle. Some of the playmaking worries there, at least from some Knicks fans, but Karl-Anthony Towns has made up nicely in that aspect as that secondary playmaker behind Jalen Brunson, and I believe also Jalen Brunson has taken his game to another level with the passing. So the Knicks, hopefully they continue to finish top 10, who knows, maybe even top 5 in that category as well. So to break in my reasons for optimism, I think we'll start off with the most obvious aspects. We'll start out with the wins at the break. I already mentioned the 36 wins, most since the 72-73 team. The Knicks have also a chance to top their win total from last year. Remember, the final game of the season against the Chicago Bulls, they won 50 games. They advanced, I think it was either to the second or third seed, in which they would play the Philadelphia 76ers. The Knicks would obviously win that round and lose to the Pacers. Regardless, the Knicks have a chance to officially cement that this team is better than last year's team, but regardless, the Knicks are also sitting comfortably in the third spot in the Eastern Conference. 2.5 games back of the Celtics, which is not bad considering how well the Celtics have played this season, obviously coming off a championship, but the Knicks haven't played well against top-tier competition exactly. We'll break into that as well. And the Knicks, with being a little bit behind the Celtics, are also sitting comfortably with not a team majorly chasing them, as the Pacers sit behind them and at the 4th seed with 5.5 games ahead of the Pacers at 4, and then it goes the Bucks, and then it goes the Pistons. But regardless, the Knicks are sitting comfortably at number 3. And also as well, just to add in some of the record stuff, 25-6 below 500 teams. The majority of the time they've dominated the competition that's beneath them. That is a good sign if you want to be a good or elite team across the league. So besides the record stuff, the biggest aspect that I think will be a potential swing factor for the New York Knicks coming into the second half is the returns of Mitchell Robinson and OG Anunoby. So we'll first off get into OG Anunoby. He's played played obviously most of the games this season. He's missing time currently with a hamstring injury, which he got himself injured versus the Lakers. I believe it was earlier this month, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it was a Saturday game. I think it was like February 1st, I believe. Not sure, but I think I'm right on that. Regardless, OG Anunoby, we'll break into the stats, and then I'll continue my talking points with OG and what the Knicks miss without him. When he's on the floor with the Knicks as a team, OG Anunoby thus far has played 1,778 minutes. The Knicks have an offensive rating as a team of 122.09. Their defensive rating is 113.65, and their net rating is plus 8.44. Now, OG's personal stats on court per 100 possessions, he's a plus 8.1 in the net rating, and his on-off metrics per 100 possessions, which is also plus minus net rating, is a plus 6. So, OG has provided is just a valuable asset to the Knicks squad when it comes to spacing, when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. I'll break that down in a sec. But when he's off the floor, the Knicks are still a positive team, rather. 829 minutes without him, 120.07 offensive rating, 117.79 defensive rating. You see the defensive rating get worse without him. And the net rating is just a plus 2.28. Not bad. Still a positive team, rather, but OG still makes a significant impact. So with OG Anunoby, and everybody talks about his defensive side of the ball, his versatility, his ability to guard 1 through 5, and ability to get steals and deflections and all that, and that's well talked about. But I think the absence of OG Anunoby has also created problems with the starting lineup. Now you see Tom Thibodeau he's very stubborn with his lineups. Doesn't really adapt, and I think that's been a big criticism of him from the fans. And he's consistently trotted out the starting lineup of Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, Precious Achiuwa, and Karl Anthony Towns. And Achiuwa is obviously good for rebounding, size, versatility defensively to take on any kind of matchup. But the real problem is with Precious Achiuwa, he's better fit as a 5 offensively because he can have at least 4 shooters around him to be that starting 5. Now, defensively, he is a bit small for a 5, but I think he still holds up well in that department. But the problem centrally, what I'm trying to get to is Josh Hart and Precious Achiuwa are 2 non-shooters. They don't shoot the ball very well. Josh Hart more so is a better shooter than Precious Achiuwa, but he doesn't do it consistently. You see against the matchups, or I should say against the Celtics and against the Lakers, you saw Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns just being loaded up on. You see that the paint is being packed with defenders. You see that Josh Hart and Precious Achiuwa are just being left alone on the perimeter, and that creates problems for Brunson and Towns because you don't want to make them perimeter-centric. And Brunson, is a 3-level scorer. Towns is somewhat of a 3-level scorer. Obviously, he can score in the post. He can back guys down. He also can shoot from 3, which we all know about. He also can drive to the rack and score a bunch, and he also can get to the free throw line. So the Knicks are just not getting points, or I should say enough points as they should, with Precious Achiuwa and Josh Hart in the starting lineup. And obviously break down into the lineup adaptability and what the Knicks should go for moving forward. Let's just say OG Anunoby misses more time. Knock what he doesn't. But the overall prognosis is having OG Anunoby at the 4 just creates more space in the paint and more driving lanes for Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson. So getting into that getting into what the support of that notion that OG Anunoby is, is underrated when it comes to being beneficial for Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns on the offensive side of the ball. Breaking into it with Brunson, Cat, and OG on the floor, the Knicks, 973 minutes in total between the 3 of them spending time on the floor together. The Knicks have an offensive rating of 123.15. The defensive rating is at 115.79. Net rating is a plus 7.37. Now, with Brunson and Cat solely on the floor without OG Anunoby, there's about 240 minutes there. Not a huge sample size, but a bit concerning when you'll come up with the numbers. The offensive rating does get a pinch better, 123.83, but the defensive rating just balloons and just gets worse. 124.02 in that, and the net rating is a negative 0.20. So I talked about the defensive aspect of the versatility. Precious adds that, but I don't think it's as significant as OG's impact defensively, or as I said earlier, his ability to space the floor with his three-point shooting and his cutting. Now, Cat with OG as well, just to break that down, Karl Anthony Towns has played 1,184 minutes with OG Anunoby, an offensive rating of 123.70, his defensive rating 114.83 as in terms of the team, and the net rating is a plus 8.87. Cat without OG on the floor, still a positive because of his overall superstar talent and his overall talent on the offensive side of the ball. Offensive rating 125.32. He's played a total of 526 minutes without OG solely. Defensive rating 116.76 with a net rating of plus 8.57. It's not to say that Karl Anthony Towns isn't a positive player. He's not a negative player. But overall, Towns' impact is more so on the offensive side of the ball. We know Cat doesn't protect the rim. He does a great job of rebounding, but the defensive side continues to lack without Mitchell Robinson and OG Anunoby. Now, getting into the Precious stats as well with Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson in limited time, as I say, because Precious has only been in the starting lineup a few times this season because of the OG Anunoby injury. In 166 minutes with those three on the floor, the Knicks have an offensive rating of 120.18. The defensive rating balloons to about 124.26, and the net rating is about a minus 4.08. So when you look at it, the substance, obviously an offensive rating of 120.18 is phenomenal. I'd say it's more due to the talents of Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, but the defensive rating is obviously worrisome with Precious Achiuwa, and him being that kind of stabilizer for rebounding and versatility defensively obviously is still a problem, and that's a big concern. But let's also get into Cat's minutes with Precious, about 309 minutes of those. 123.06 offensive rating, 120.82 defensive rating, net rating of a 2.24, which is not bad overall. When it comes to Jalen Brunson, however, with solely Precious on the floor next to him, 481 minutes of that, 118.96 offensive rating, defensive rating of 120.82, and a net rating of minus 1.85. Not to say that Precious, again, is a net negative. He has his purposes, but him being a permanent four for the next team because of size, I think will hurt them in the long run. Just to include some final stats about OG Anunoby, the team is 52-20 since last year, but since acquiring OG Anunoby when he's on the court and available. Obviously, you saw what impact he made in the playoffs last year. Obviously, you look at Game 2, I think was a prime example of what OG Anunoby could be before he unfortunately pulled a hamstring. And I believe I'm actually wrong on that. It was a hamstring this year. It was a hamstring last year in the playoffs. This year was a foot injury that is harming OG Anunoby. Obviously, the stigma around him is he's a bit injury prone. But regardless, he's set to return after the All-Star break. And I mentioned the spacing issues with Precious Achiuwa on the floor instead of OG Anunoby, and hopefully the Knicks come back in sync with OG Anunoby back. So another piece to the puzzle that could potentially be added is Mitchell Robinson, and we know what he brings. He's been the longest tenured Knick this far since 2018. Being drafted in the second round, he brings much-needed rim protection, defensive and offensive rebounding. He allows Cat to be more aggressive in pick and rolls. We'll talk about that in a second. But he also does create limitations with the spacing and makes Cat more perimeter-oriented, but I think he does have his uses. So just getting into the key statistics as well, in terms of the Knicks and how they grade out as a team, some of the defensive and rebounding rankings. In blocks per game, the Knicks are last, 3.8 blocks per game, which ranks 30th. That is down 7.4% from last year. Obviously, not having a true backup big like an Isaiah Hartenstein is a bit of a factor in that. Obviously, the Knicks did not re-sign Isaiah Hartenstein. Precious Achiuwa has been the main backup five for some of the season. although he missed the start of the season due to a hamstring injury. Jericho Sims was obviously the backup 5 for a bit until he got traded. The defensive rating I mentioned is 20th in the league. Defensive rebounding is actually down 1.3%, 32.1 defensive rebounds grabbed per game, ranking 25th. The defensive rebound percentage is also middle of the pack, 18th in the NBA, 74.8 defensive rebound percentage. But the offensive rebounding and the offensive rebound percentage are kind of different. Offensive rebounding percentage, the Knicks actually rank 8th, and I think that can only get better with Mitchell Robinson coming back on the floor to help Karl Anthony Towns out. The Knicks' offensive rebounds at about a 26.4% clip. The offensive rebounds, they grab about 10.9 per game, which ranks 18th, down 13.9% from last year. Obviously, I just mentioned Isaiah Hartenstein being a big factor in terms of the rebounding and the blocks per game, as well as more than serviceable backup 5, but he was also there to create those second chance opportunities. And in total, the Knicks ranked 23rd in rebounding, 43 rebounds grabbed per game, which is also down 4.8%. And when I talk about Karl Anthony Towns being more aggressive in the pick and rolls, the Knicks have been torched in the pick and roll this year. And that's, I think, a worry of mine heading into the playoffs potentially. More so without Mitchell Robinson. Hopefully, as Shams Charania reported that the deadline for the Knicks is hoping to get Mitchell Robinson back before the 1st of March. Obviously, it's going to take a bit for Mitchell Robinson to come back and be fully conditioned. If he's in the starting lineup, we have no idea. Obviously, it adds size when you have OG Anunoby in the front court with Karl Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson at this center position grabbing boards and protecting the rim. But when just looking overall at the visual aspect, when you look at the Knicks and how they scheme their P&Rs, or I should say how they defend the pick and roll, is they usually play a lot of drop coverage, whether it's Hart guarding the ball handler or Mikal Bridges or Brunson. They usually have Towns backing up and playing drop coverage. Now, I'm not a big fan of drop coverage because potentially that allows a lot of mid-range jumpers, and that also allows a lot of alley-oops because drop coverage is designed to essentially take away the paint from the ball handler, but also, sometimes it gives up mid-range jumpers. That's not the biggest deal, but it's also giving up alley-oops to a lot of more athletic centers like Clint Capella or whoever you may say that, is the role man in those situations. But the Knicks also, at times, they switch the pick and roll. They also tend to hedge at times and be a little aggressive. I like to see a bit more aggression. But I think with Mitchell Robinson coming back, you're going to have somebody who's patrolling the paint for blocks, for rebounding purposes, which is going to allow Karl Anthony Towns to guard a little bit more on the perimeter, which can be concerning. But I think the idea of hedging or switching or icing the ball screens with Mitchell Robinson in the paint is going to be a little more formidable defensive tactic as opposed to playing drop coverage where alley-oops will be given up the paint. And also as well, pick and pops. The Knicks have not really defended well at all this year as well. So getting into defending the pick and roll, the Knicks ranked in the 13th percentile, which is one of the worst in the NBA. Scoring frequency, opponents score 42.2% against the Knicks in the pick and roll. It's not so much efficiency, it's how often they score. That's 25th in the league, which is about 5th, 6th worst in the NBA. Points per possession allowed in the NBA, I should say among the ranks in the NBA, 0.94, which is tied for 3rd worst. They allow the most points per game in that specific action, 20.6 points per game in the pick and roll. Also as well, they give up an opposing field goal percentage of 44.7. So at the same, as I mentioned, the pick and roll has been bad defending for the Knicks, whether it's Bridges, whether it's Hart being the man in the action, or Karl Anthony Towns, obviously playing in his drop coverage. But the biggest problem that the Knicks are going to have, especially in those non-Mitchell Robinson minutes as well, is teams will hunt Karl Anthony Towns, teams will hunt Jalen Brunson. Tom Thibodeau has to find a way to try to hide his two weakest defenders on the team. Now just for some other stats as well with OG and Mitchell Robinson. I didn't bring them up as solely as a tandem. I brought them up separately. But in some of the minutes that they've actually played together, there's been success. Now, I'm going to go back to the playoffs real quick. Of last year, Mitchell Robinson played in 3 games. Obviously had his ankle broken by Joel Embiid. But regardless, in the minutes that he played with OG Anunoby, The Knicks had a net rating of 9.61. Their defensive rating was 112.24, and their offensive rating was 121.85. So they were beyond formidable, or I should say, beyond more formidable with OG and Mitchell on the floor as a defensive tandem. And Mitchell Robinson as well in 110 minutes last year in the playoffs, a ranking of, I should say, a net rating of 11.43, 121.43 offensive rating in 110 minutes, and a defensive rating of 110, which is astounding. So Mitchell Robinson, his impact is obviously much missed thus far. Hopefully he returns before the beginning of March, and hopefully he speeds up his conditioning so he's ready for the playoffs. Getting into some concerns for the New York Knicks, I went over the optimism of OG and Mitchell Robinson and the record stuff, but getting into, now I mentioned the 25-6 record versus below 500 teams. That's a great thing, but the problem with the Knicks, and I think one of the skeptics, or I should say most of the skeptics have said this about the Knicks, they're 11-12 versus the 500 plus teams. Now, I'm going to count in some key losses that they've had this season. 2 times they faced the Celtics, they got blown out. Opening night, and more recently, I think it was about a week ago or so, they lost 131-104 in a game that they didn't even look like they had any business in. I mean, the Knicks were starting to come back in that game with Cameron Payne and Deuce McBride on the floor. I should say more Deuce McBride in the second half because Tom Thibodeau made that adjustment to go a little bit more small for the aspect of shooting. But Jason Tatum just went off, and the Knicks just did not catch up at that game. Karl Anthony Towns was being taken away. Jalen Brunson was being taken away by a great defensive game plan by Joe Mazzulla and exposed the issues with having Josh Hart and Precious Achiuwa on the same floor. Also as well, besides the Celtics, the top tier team in the Eastern Conference, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, this was way earlier in the season. The Knicks will actually be playing the Cleveland Cavaliers on Friday in Cleveland. The Knicks played a home game earlier this season against the Cavaliers. I believe they had like a 10 or 12 point lead, and the Knicks ended up blowing it. But that was a more so earlier on in the season. I think we'll see more of a litmus test when we face them on Friday. Obviously, I brought this up earlier. There was a big loss against the Lakers earlier this month, which got OG Anunoby hurt with a foot injury. That was another game where an opposing coaching staff, with obviously J.J. Redick at the helm, exposed the lack of shooting around Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. They strictly shut down and neutralized Brunson and Towns getting to the paint, in which they allowed Josh Hart to have open rain from 3, which he's not consistent. Same thing for Precious Achiuwa, not being a viable threat from the perimeter. And 2 disappointing losses that I thought the Knicks had were against the Pistons. Knicks were well in these games, but they just could not get defensive stops in the end. I think Malik Beasley had 2 big games against the Knicks at Madison Square Garden. That was a tough sight to see. Malik Beasley is one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA this year, no doubt, but that is something you absolutely have to game plan for, and I feel that the Knicks didn't do that properly. And just for the record as well, the Knicks also beat up on the Pistons earlier this year in Detroit, but I think they might have another matchup left with the Pistons, but not totally sure. But I think they should have won at least 2 of those games against the Pistons. Not saying it had to be a sweep, but regardless. And another game, I should say another set of games, was against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, the first game was in Oklahoma City, and that was one hell of a matchup for the Knicks. I thought the Knicks were going to come out winning that game. I think it was the case that Jalen Brunson ended up sitting too long, and the Knicks ended up losing because Aaron Wiggins started to go off, Jalen Williams started to go off, and Tom Thibodeau was purely outcoached by Mark Daigneault. The second game was not even close. The second game was at MSG and was not even close to competitive. There was no player in that game that you could point out on the Knicks that played really well, and I think the Thunder also exposed the Knicks' lack of depth, which has hurt them this season, and which I'll get to in a second. But the amount of, and yes, some skeptics of the overall point that I'm trying to bring up, the 500 teams thing, say, hey, you know what? That doesn't matter when it comes to playoffs. Everybody's on even ground. Sure, but when you have teams like the Celtics and the Lakers game planning against your weaknesses and strictly exposing them, you have to find a way to mitigate those weaknesses and create more strengths. You have to adjust. You have to adapt. And that's going to be for sure on Tom Thibodeau. So for substance as well, the Knicks also have the 8th hardest schedule remaining. They have 2 games against Boston, April 8th, I believe, at the Garden and as in Madison Square Garden. And so this Sunday coming up against the Boston Celtics at TD Garden. So the Knicks will get two tough opponents in a row in Cleveland and Boston. They also play Cleveland for two more games, aforementioned, and on Friday and on April the 2nd. They also play the Lakers as a part of a West Coast trip on the 6th of March. So those are going to be some tough games. We'll see how the Knicks play. So I talked a little bit about the scheming and the spacing and how the Lakers and Celtics exposed the weaknesses on the Knicks. Some just things I wanted to point out, some observations visually. Campaign had a really good start against the Celtics in I believe it was the first half of the game at Madison Square Garden. He barely played any minutes in the second half, which was questionable, and it really hurt Jalen Brunson, who was not exact. I don't think he was exactly having the greatest game, taking a lot of bad shots. As I said, Boston neutralized him and Karl Anthony Towns in the game plan, and the Knicks just needed another scorer, another creator, and campaign not being in that second half as much as he should have was diabolical, and it was just to showcase how Tom Thibodeau was outcoached that game, and probably one of his worst coaching exhibits of the season. Now, I also talked about the spacing issues with Tom Thibodeau using Josh Hart, Karl Anthony Towns, and Precious Achiuwa together for size aspect. And yes, Tom Thibodeau was a defensive guy, but I think in my opinion, without OG Anunoby right now, the Knicks should be suiting their lineup based on their matchup, whoever they face. And if like certain matchups ask you to go big, you go big. Like if you're facing a team like the Golden State Warriors who could shoot the lights out, you go small and try to one-up them. That's the idea. It's not like, oh, we have to stop them. Yes, defense plays a monumental part, and Tibbs is a defensive guy, but the Knicks right now, honestly, do not have a defensive identity. And obviously, yes, you want to build a defensive identity. And another part, which I forgot to bring up earlier, was when it comes to the concerns against these top tier level teams, is that these top tier level teams, like the Thunder, the Cavaliers, the Lakers, the Celtics, they have an identity on both sides of the ball. The Knicks do not have any identity on the defensive side of the ball, A. B, when it comes to the playoffs, and obviously the Knicks offense is set for this because they play at a very slow pace, yet being very hyper efficient, is that the game slows down and defense really wins these games. You see teams in the past, like the Atlanta Hawks, very, very potent offensive team. The problem is they can't play defense. The one year, obviously, they went to the Eastern Conference Finals, faced the Bucks. They lost. Bucks were a better defensive team. They've lost to the Heat in the past. They've lost the Celtics in the first round in the past, and that's because of their defensive issues. And Joe Mazzulla and Eric Spoelstra are scheming against Quinn Snyder in those situations where those weaknesses of the Atlanta defense were exposed. Their perimeter defense, their pick and roll defense, all these different things. And as the Knicks, and having a lack of defensive identity, they have to find it some time before the playoffs. They have to find that sort of defensive chemistry, and there's been some question marks there. Definitely, as I mentioned, with the pick and roll defense, their perimeter defense arguably being the worst perimeter defending team across the NBA, and that's been a concern not just this year, even like the last few years when the defense was much more efficient, higher in the defensive rating scale, and just Tom Thibodeau just has not found a way for the Knicks to properly defend the three-pointer at all, and he just has not innovated that part of his defensive game plan. I talked about a little bit about the spacing issues and the type of competition that the Knicks would be facing upcoming on the schedule, and the type of schedule, or I should say the type of opponents they faced in the past that were over 500 in their losses. But another thing that is concerning as well is potentially the starters running out of minutes. And we'll start with the stats real quick. Mikal Bridges leading the NBA, 38 minutes per game. He still has not missed a game in his NBA career, which is amazing to this point. I'm surprised he hasn't missed a game this year with all the wear and tear that's going to come down on his body. Same thing for Josh Hart. He's only missed one game this year, 37.8 minutes per game. But the overall issue is, I talked about the lack of depth earlier with the Knicks and the Thunder exposing that, is with the lack of depth or the lack of consistent bench production for the Knicks, it forces more of a heavy burden on the starters. Like Mikal Bridges playing 38 minutes per game should not be happening. That's also an attribution to the lack of depth. a lack of wing help that the Knicks have. Like, who's their best wing? Landry Shamet. Like, yes, he can have his some offensive outbursts, but I haven't seen many of them. I think it was like I believe it was the Pacers game recently where he had his biggest offensive output. I could be wrong on that, but overall, Shamet's known for his defense. Offensively, just doesn't get it done in my opinion. You're not seeing a lot of consistency there. Campaign, I think, is more of the same. I think he's been an impactful player on this Knicks team, especially with Deuce McBride being the secondary ball handler off the bench. Campaign can run the offense, but I think at times he tends to heat check himself a little too much. He takes shots that he shouldn't. Shot selection is iffy, and sometimes he's just out of control running the offense. Like he's good for a veteran presence, but I think at times his style of play is just not needed. And his overall scoring is a bit hot and cold. Like some nights you'll get like 10, 11, 12 points, and some nights he'll be like 2 for 8 from the field where he's only scoring 3 or 4 points. And I talk about the overall consistency, and that's been a big problem for the Knicks. Last year, the Knicks had a bench where you could rely on. You obviously had Isaiah Hartenstein. You had Josh Hart off the bench. In my opinion, that's his best role. And when it comes to the playoffs, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of lineups the Knicks have with Mitchell Robinson, Karl-Anthony Towns. Do they bench Josh Hart? Do they leave him in the starting lineup? Do they? I don't think they would put Mikal Bridges on the bench. Obviously, also depends on OG Anunoby's health, but that's going to be a big factor as well. And the biggest, and why I bring up the lack of depth was it's the same issue the Knicks had last season, more so in the playoffs because of all the injuries. Bojan Bogdanovic getting hurt, Mitchell Robinson getting hurt with that broken ankle, also an ankle injury for Bogdanovic as well. OG Anunoby, hamstring injury. Josh Hart, abdomen injury. You saw this team, especially in Game 7, running out of gas. And Jalen Brunson inevitably breaking his hand. Not saying it was inevitable to the point like, oh, it was going to happen, but these guys, like I think it was once or twice last year as well in the playoffs, Josh Hart was playing 48 minutes in an entire game where he got no rest. And that will take a toll on you. So at the end of the day, with the guys at the end of the bench, and this is a criticism a bit of Leon Rose and Tom Thibodeau. Thibodeau has to open up the rotation when it comes to playoffs. Like, next man up. That has to be the mindset of this team. They have to be strong about it. Next man up. I don't care, whether you're just playing in the G League or not, whether it's a Tyler Kolek or Pacome Dadier or Matt Ryan. If somebody gets hurt, they have to slot in, just for the sake of the endurance and the stamina of these starters. And one minor thing as well when it comes to the injuries is OG Anunoby, as I said earlier, has a tendency to be injury prone. Last year, he had a hamstring injury in the playoffs. Before that, he had an elbow injury during the regular season where he missed a decent amount of time. And the Knicks desperately missed his presence in some of those games. This year, he's missing some time with a foot injury. And you just don't want to see him get hurt again. Same thing for Mitchell Robinson. Had a long injury last year. I don't remember. I think it was a lower leg injury of some sort where he's out for a couple months. He ended up coming back towards the end of the regular season and being very much impactful for the first 3 games of the playoffs. Inevitably breaks his ankle because of Joel Embiid grabbing it. But regardless, you just don't want to see these guys get hurt again because you're, again, really testing your depth. And that's something that the Knicks do not need if they want an enhanced run in the playoffs, a long playoff run at that, if they want to really reach their goals. So, if I had to come up with a final prediction for where the Knicks would end off their regular season, I'm going to say they end off with about 55 wins. They have about 28 games left remaining. You do the math there, they would win about 19 games, maybe lose about 9, or potentially also as well, they could, I say 54, 55 wins, I think is their benchmark. I'd be surprised if they won more. I'd be very surprised if they won less and somehow we're still at the 40-something win mark. I would be incredibly disappointed, but it doesn't get easier for the Knicks coming up. When we talk about the playoffs and when the playoffs come around, I'll eventually make a playoff prediction. But regardless, with all that being said and done, if you guys haven't already, please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button as well. Turn on the notification bell so you know when I go live or I drop a new video. I appreciate you all supporting me through my inconsistencies with the content, hoping to be more consistent, coming back with more videos and more recaps and more live streams. So I appreciate you all sticking with me, and I'll talk to you later.